What's going on, dudes? Nick here, or RGA Gaming, and welcome to the BroZone. Today, guys, we're going to be making something even better than last time, and that is going to be delicious beef jerky. We've got a whole bunch of stuff here that we're going to be putting together, and the reason we're doing this one is because I asked you guys on Twitter, what would you guys rather see? Would you rather see me make beef jerky, or would you rather see me create 4 different kinds of apple cider? If that's just apple cider, that'd be boring. Of course not. We want to do hard apple cider, but that will be coming in a video very soon. But for today, stay tuned for some beef jerky. All right, so I've got 3 different types of beef here today. The first one that I've got is a eye of round. It's basically, if you can see it here, let me get it nice and close. You can see that the grain really runs pretty much completely horizontal in this one. So this one would be perfect for cutting super thin vertically, and then that would allow us to have like really tender pieces of jerky, because basically if you cut it lengthwise, I mean, you probably could do that, but then you're going to end up with a lot firmer of a meat, and you're really going to have to like pull to try to tear it apart. Whereas if you go against the grain and cut it this way, then it's already in nice manageable strips, and then you also are cutting against the grain, so it'll be really tender when you go to cook it. And I should probably mention, the reason I'm using 3 different types is because I really want to find out what type of meat I personally like best. Now, you guys might pick one of these above the others, but for me, I want to be able to experiment and see which one I like best. Next up, I've got a bottom round roast, which is kind of similar to the first one here, except if you look really closely, the grain kind of changes direction a little bit in the meat. Like, instead of just going completely sideways, this one kind of like splits out in kind of like a little Y section over this little fatty area here. So that's that one. And then I've got 2 of these bad boys. Good God. So these are both round tip roasts, boneless round tip roasts, and they are very, very nice looking. There's not a ton of fat in them, which is one thing that I was looking for when I was trying to find this, is I didn't want to have a lot of fat. So you can see this one has a little bit of fat on the edges. I'll have to trim off, but I think all these do. And this one, the grain actually comes basically from the bottom of the packaging up, so it comes out this way. So even if we slice it this way, there's not going to be too long of pieces where we're going to have to worry about anything. And honestly, I've never had a problem making jerky yet, so I don't think it'll be an issue. But to begin with, basically what we have to do is we have to take the beef and marinate it, usually for a minimum of probably like 4 to 6 hours. I mean, some people say 8 to 12. Some people just say, you know, prep it the night before and then the next morning go ahead and start it, so maybe like 12 plus hours. Obviously, the longer it sits in there, the more flavor it's going to absorb into it, but there's also a maximum of flavor that's going to absorb anyways. So kind of leave that up to you guys. I'm going to let this sit overnight. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon right now, so I'm probably just going to let this sit in the fridge overnight and then throw it in the dehydrator tomorrow. Now, fortunately, you guys, this is going to be one big process from beginning to end, but for me, I'm going to have to wait a few days between the start, cooking, and finished product. And I'm also going to bag some in Mylar to be able to give it out to my friends and family, as well as help it keep a little bit longer. But we'll get into that towards the end of the video. So before we make any of our sauces and stuff, what I want to do is I want to actually trim up the meat and get it sliced into little manageable pieces. So for each of these, I'm going to be doing them a little bit differently, and it's going to take some time because I really want to make sure to get all the fat around the edges cut off. You know, basically, like, you don't want any fat in there. Fat is what can make your jerky go bad. The more fat you have, the higher chance of you have of that stuff going rancid. So the meat itself, if it's dehydrated, is usually pretty good, but if you have fat, it doesn't really retain moisture, but fat itself can go bad after a while, even if it's dehydrated. So that's the reason we're going to try to cut out as much of that as we can, and that's why we're also looking for meats that don't have a ton of marbling, because you can't really cut that out. I mean, you could, but then your meat would be all like shredded and stuff, and nobody wants shredded jerky. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I do like shredded jerky. Anyways, first things first, I'm just going to go down the line and cut them in the exact same order into probably about 1/4 inch or so thick pieces. And I'm going to do so with this knife here. Now, I don't know if this is the right knife or not, but honestly, this thing is super sharp, and this is what I use to make all my jerky, and I haven't had a problem yet. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to pull up a chair because this is probably going to take a while. Yeah, let's go ahead and get this stuff cut up and started, starting with the eye of round. Now, this one here does not have much fat if any, really, that I need to trim off. I mean, there's a couple, like, tiny pieces, and when I say tiny, I mean, like, like, actually, I think I cut off more meat here than I did fat, so, yeah, not really much. Actually, that one was just kind of sticking to the edge. So this one's actually pretty much trimmed up a little bit here. I think what I'm going to do is try to follow this edge and see if I can kind of follow that same line. Now, my meat is still cool. I find it's a lot easier to handle meat and cutting it in, like, more uniform pieces when it's cool. If it's warm, it gets a little bit more limp and it's harder to cut. So, little pro tip there. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using these little trays here for storing the meat. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut up the meat, put them into sections grouped by the type of meat, and then I'm going to pour my marinade in there, kind of move it around, mess it around a little bit, and let it sit overnight in these. So the reason I chose this instead of like a bag is because at least here I can kind of lay everything flat, kind of push it down, make sure it all gets covered nicely, and it's also stackable. So I can put a couple of these on top of each other in my fridge without wasting a ton of room. So let's check out my non-existent chef meat cutting skills. And I believe as long as you put a little bit of pressure behind it, it'll make it a little easier to cut. Now, if you go too thick, it's not the end of the world. It just means that you'll have to dehydrate a little bit longer. So let's see how we did on our first cut here. Okay. So obviously this one, the bottom's a little thick. I'm gonna cut that, but you can see pretty much about a 1/4 inch thick. Almost looks like lunch meat. So yeah, this one here is just like the way they cut it from the store. Let me see if I can try to trim that a little bit. So obviously that's a little too thick there. And if you notice there are pieces like that, again, it's not the end of the world if you have to trim up your meats. I mean, while everyone kind of wants theirs to be pretty, at the end of the day, you're just going to be eating this stuff. So it's not a huge deal if it doesn't look perfect. So there we go. Took off a piece like that, and now it's a lot more manageable. So like I said, what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to try not to drop this knife on my leg. I'm just going to get this stuff stacked in here and just keep cutting this. So I'll probably be back in a second once this is all chopped up. So here we've got the bottom round. And like I said, this one's going to have a lot more trim work just because of the type of cut. You can see there's a lot of fat on there, and the more you can get off of it, the better your jerky will be. It'll be cleaner, a cleaner process, and it'll last a lot longer. Well, maybe not a lot longer, because obviously you're going to eat this stuff pretty quick, but it will help it stay preserved. Alright, so we've got our meat trimmed up. You can see there's really not too much fat or anything on here now. Any big pieces that we do find, we can trim off as we go. But basically what I'm going to try to do is, let's see, what way does the grain mostly go? I feel like it mostly flows kind of on an upward angle this way. So I'm thinking if I cut from this edge, then we should be good. But I'm also thinking about cutting this roughly in half. Where does the grain split on this side? Let's see if we do this. Let's try this. Let's see what happens. You only get one chance at cutting this, though. So, there we go. One piece there. Actually looks pretty good. Again, we're pretty much going against the grain on this cut, so I'm really not too worried about it. Our jerky is going to be super tender anyways, so no matter what happens, this stuff's going to be delicious. All right, we've got our first beautiful tray of meat done. There we go. This thing looks good. So you've got the two different types here. The next up, we've got the round tip roast. So I'm going to cut those two up. If those two get mixed together, it's not that big of a deal because they're basically the exact same cuts of meat. But these two I have separated a little bit just so I know what ones are what. And there were a few pieces of this one here that I had to cut different sections out depending if there was too much fat. So never be afraid to trim your meat because you only really get one chance at it. It doesn't do you much good if you try to trim it off after it's cooked. So I'll be back once I cut these two up, and then we'll get started on the next fun part of this process. Now this cut here has a lot of fat, and it's actually because it's technically, I believe this is actually 2 cuts of meat here. You've got your little eye part here, and you've got a second part here. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get these fat lines, basically following the fat lines of the meat, cutting them into 2 steaks, and I'll strip them up and cut them from there. That way I don't have any weird differing grain cuts or anything like that, and it'll all be pretty much uniform. And like I said, this process takes quite a bit of time, so don't rush it. You don't, like I said, you don't want to ruin your meat because you're a little bit impatient now. Okay. Yeah, I just did that thing I told you guys not to do, and that was cut myself. So, unfortunately, the tip of the knife kind of got away from me there and poked me. So, basically, all I'm going to do now is wait for the bleeding to stop and get back to cutting, because there's no use crying over a little spilled blood. Alright guys, we've got our 2 trays of meat cut up, and I want to say, I could check the packaging to be exact, but I believe each of those packages was roughly, rounds were 2 pounds, and this is like 2.5 pounds, so probably about like 8 to 10 pounds of meat total, which is how we're going to be able to know how much sauce to put in our recipe. Now, before I actually start making the sauce, what I want to do is I want to take some salt, and I'm going to use this salt here, which is just coarse sea salt. It could be coarse, any type of salt, iodized salt. The reason I use coarse is because it has a tendency of sticking around a little bit longer, really helping to get absorbed in the meat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour it all over the meat. And the reason I'm going to do that is because they used to, in the old days, use salt to preserve meats and other goods. So by pouring salt onto it, the salt draws out the liquids and will dry out the meat. So the reason I do this first is because it'll start to draw out the liquids and leave the meat kind of dry, which means then when we add our other flavored liquids in later, the meat reabsorbs and sucks it back in, becomes rehydrated, and it really gets down deep into the meat. And usually I'd let this sit for a little while. Obviously it's not as long as it probably could be, but a little bit of time is better than none. So all I'm really going to do is just sprinkle a ton of this all over the meat, both trays, and then I'm going to stir it around and then put a little bit more in. So I kind of want everything to be really covered with this. And if you're afraid of using salt, then beef jerky is probably not for you, because wait till you see everything else that goes in it. Alright, so I've got the salt all in here. I'm going to, let's see if I can do this with one hand. Mix it all up. Get that salt in there, and then I can use my other hand to reapply more salt as needed. So this one here, this is all the same type of meat, so if this one gets mixed up a little bit, not really too concerned about that. But this tray here are 2 completely different cuts of meat, and those are the ones that I want to keep a little bit separated. If they get mixed, I really don't care. I mean, I'm going to eat it all anyways, but just for the purposes of knowing which meat I like best, that is the reason I'm doing that. So this is pretty well mixed up. I'm going to put a little bit more salt on top. And I wouldn't worry about using too much salt. I mean, there is such a thing as too much salt, but I mean, you're going to be bathing this thing in like soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce, and a bunch of other ingredients, so it's really not an issue. And honestly, salt and pepper is like the base of cooking pretty much any type of meat. So having extra salt, we'll just make it a little bit saltier, but I mean, it's beef jerky. It's not like this stuff is low in salt. So this next part is kind of really up to you what you want to do with it. This is where recipes can only go so far. So typically what you do is you want to mix equal parts of Worcestershire sauce with equal parts of soy sauce. Also, you're going to want to add in some liquid smoke to your liking. Some people don't like as much smoke flavor, other people do. I happen to be on the side that likes more of the smoke flavor, so I usually use a little bit more. A little bit of salt, pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder. So this is going to be for our base. This is our marinade. This is what our meat's going to sit in overnight and really try to absorb the flavors of. And then tomorrow, when we go to lay it out on the trays for the dehydrator, I'm going to take some directly out of the brine, the solution, and I'm going to put it on the trays. And then some of it, I'm going to take some black pepper, some fresh cracked black pepper, and sprinkle it over the top to give it an extra strong pepper flavor, which is one of my favorites. And then also, this guy here, break it up a little bit. This is jalapeno powder. Now this is pure jalapeno powder. I grew the jalapenos myself, dehydrated it, and ground it up, and whoo, I can already smell that stuff just from shaking it up. It smells so good. So I'm gonna have some jalapeno jerky. I made some last time I did jerky, and it was probably one of my favorites. Now I did mess it up because I used raw jalapenos, and I used a couple red ones, and wherever the red ones touched were super hot. So you'd be like, oh, this has good flavor. And you get to one of those pieces where the red hot jalapeno was touching it, and all of a sudden your mouth's on fire. So it was a little uncontrolled. So I figured this time if I use the powder, it should be a little bit more easier to manage. But we won't need this until tomorrow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get all my ingredients together. First thing, I'm going to take my giant bottle of soy sauce. This is I don't even know how much is in here. There's just a ton. And I'm going to put, I'm going to do this in 2 batches, 1 for each tray. I'm going to try to make them as equal as possible. But I'm going to put about a cup and a quarter of soy sauce in here. And then I'm going to take my Worcestershire sauce and fill it up to about the 2-cup mark. This part always takes forever. Come on, get out of my bottle. Actually, this bottle's feeling a little bit empty. I thought it was a little fuller than it was. So I'm going to do the 3/4 mark. And then if there's any left at the end, I'll just mix it between the 2 trays and go from there. I'll have to pick up another bottle of that. So now that we've got that, I'm going to fill it up to basically the 2-cup mark with the rest of this. So 1.5 cups of soy sauce with a 1/2 cup of Worcestershire. And now I'm going to add in our liquid smoke. Now this stuff is strong. I used about this much of the bottle, and that was with about the same amount of jerky as this time. So probably using about 1/4 of the bottle. And like I said, this is something you can add to your taste and your liking. So let me see how that does there. Where are we at? About here. Yeah, that's a little bit more. A little bit more never hurt anybody. And you can make your own liquid smoke if you want to figure that out. Maybe I'll do that one day. Never tried it. I've seen recipes for it, but never actually tried it myself. Next up, I'm also going to take, oh, looks like it's a brand new onion powder. So we got to open this thing up. And again, this is all to your liking. I know roughly the flavors that I like. So onion powder is definitely one of them. You don't want to use too much of this stuff because it can overpower some of the other flavors. But probably put about probably close to a tablespoon in there. And also garlic powder. I'll probably use a little bit less than onion, but the garlic powder does give it nice flavor as well. So I'm just going to put that in there. Alright, that should be good there. Also, I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I mean, salt never really hurt anybody. It also pushes that stuff down. We'll go ahead and now I'm going to grab some whole black peppercorns. And I'm going to throw them into here. Let's see, how many do we want? About a tablespoon of these. So you can see these are inside there. And I'm just going to give it a quick little crush. And I'm just going to put that in there. Pour the whole thing in. Cool. All right, now remember when I said we wouldn't need the jalapeno powder till tomorrow? I lied. Actually, I forgot that what I'm going to do is I'm going to let some of the beef marinate within the mixture with jalapeno in here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up and I'm going to pour in a pretty decent amount. So about that much. Pretty good amount of powder. You can see there's like a mix of red and green jalapenos. And I just dusted the desk with this stuff. And that should be a decent amount of flavor. And I'm going to pour in a little bit of this. Kind of get that really mixed up in here. So I want it to kind of absorb all the jalapeno in there. And if we look now, we've got like this little almost Christmas looking thing. It looks a little disgusting right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of the meat. And this will be for our jalapeno. So I'm actually going to take from this one here, because we have the most of this one. So I'm just going to take some of these smaller pieces and put it in here. Actually, that's a really big piece. Let's go. So I want some of the smaller ones. So I'm just going to grab a bunch of the small stuff, throw this in here. So we got this bowl full, basically. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more of this mixture here. And I think that should be enough to coat it all. I'm going to cover this up and make sure it's completely sealed, so we don't want this going everywhere. But give it a little bit of a shake. I want all the meat to just get covered with that sauce. Oh, this is going to be so delicious. I should have enough fluid in this one, now I took some meat out of here, pretty much cover this whole tray. So let's just go ahead and pour this in here. I just really want to make sure the meat is all completely covered. And this one's going to be a little harder to move around, so I think what I'm going to do is just kind of flip it by hand. I mean, unfortunately at this part, I've got to get myself a little bit dirty here. So I'm just going to I'm going to try to keep it in the same piles. I'm just going to kind of spread it out, flatten it down a little bit, and then give it a slight toss once it's in here. So this is pretty much as submerged as it's going to get. So let me grab another sanitation towel, get my hands a little bit clean, and I'm going to go bring these upstairs to the fridge. So this is going to be the end of part one now. I'm going to go put this stuff all in the fridge upstairs, and then tomorrow we're going to take it out, give it a little bit of extra seasoning, get it in that dehydrator, and in about, I think it's about 12 hours, 12 to 14 hours, something like that, it'll be fully cooked. So we'll get that process started tomorrow, but for now, these bad boys are going into the fridge. Alright, it has been about 12 hours since I first started making the first video. Actually, probably a little bit longer than that. So, all of our meat is completely saturated with that beautiful juice. And it's kind of a shame. I wish I would have had like more meat to put back into this juice, maybe combine it and put like a ton more in. And I guess that's always one way to do it, if you want to do it that way, if you wanted to save some of the juice and reuse it. But honestly, I'm not really too worried about it. So today, now that we've let this sit overnight and really get those flavors in there, we're going to be doing step 2. And step 2 is getting it ready to put into our dehydrator. So I've got this Excalibur, I think it's a 9-tray dehydrator, and basically it has these little removable screens here, and this is what I put my jerky directly on, because it's not going to fit on here really. I mean, maybe some of the bigger pieces, but probably not. So we're just going to put it on these, and what we're going to do is we're just going to basically take each one, and we're going to fill it up, leaving enough space between them where they're not touching, so if they touch, then they might like harden together, or they might not fully dry because they're overlapping and they're gonna be a lot thicker. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put them on this tray one at a time and get all the trays filled. So that's basically all we're doing now. And then from here, we're going to be placing it into the dehydrator, and then we're going to be setting the timer. Now on the top of my dehydrator, it says for jerky, you wanna go to 165, which is pretty much as hot as this thing gets. So I'm gonna set my temperature knob all the way up there. And I'll look up the exact time from the manual, but I want to say it's somewhere between like, I don't know, 14 or 16 hours, something like that. You don't want to cook it too long or too hot. Because if you go too long or you make it too hot, then you're going to dry your jerky out and it's going to end up like little sticks, and it's just not as good. All right, so as promised, I'm going to basically take my little jar of jalapeno powder and cock the lid off a little bit, just so I can sprinkle a little bit of jalapeno dust on each one of these pieces. So basically what we should end up with is about like 2.5 trays of, actually probably about 3 trays of pepper, 2 trays of original, and 1 tray of jalapeno. And I'll be really curious to see how this jalapeno turns out, because like I said last time, I think I did sprinkle the top of it with this, but I feel like this is going to have a lot more flavor since it was able to really sit in the jalapeno juice for that long period. So cool. Got our last tray in there. So we got 6 out of 9 trays filled. The bottom 3, I guess I'll just leave in there. I might even put like a paper towel or something in the very bottom to try to catch anything that drips, but honestly, I'm not really too worried about it. But now it's time to go plug this in upstairs, and when I'm back, everything will be done, and we can actually taste test this stuff, and I'm super excited, but now I gotta wait basically until tomorrow to do that. But for you, it's gonna happen like... Alright guys, it is day 3 of the project, and we are done with everything. So in front of me, I've got all the bags of finished jerky. Basically what I did was I took everything and split it up by the cut of meat, as well as whether it was peppered or original. So basically, like right here, we've got a bag of peppered, and then we've got the original, so this is like the same tray. And then we've also got this one here, peppered and original. And then we've also got more peppered and original. And we've, last but not least, we've got the jalapeno and our mixed bag of little bits. So basically every tray was split into its own bag. That way I could keep track of it and really give everything a taste test. Now, I, of course, had to try some of this stuff. I took it off the dehydrator in 2 batches as well. Last night I pretty much took all the small stuff. So like the jalapeno, you can see is really small pieces in there. Actually, let's open it up and let you guys probably get a better view. But you can see the jalapeno is really small pieces. But some of the bigger ones, like this one here, where you can see are like giant sized pieces. Oops, I dropped the bag as well. The ones that had bigger pieces took a lot longer to cook. Fuck off. So the bags that had bigger pieces took longer to cook. So last night, after probably about 8 hours, I took the first batch off, which is pretty much all the small pieces, started bagging them. And then I think I let the big pieces that were not done yet still go for another like 4 hours or something like that. I think it was 4 hours. There's something. I think total, those ones probably cooked for about 12. The other ones probably cooked for 8. And that is one thing you want to watch, because if you would have let all the small pieces go for 8 hours, they would literally turn into little hard sticks. They would crack and just be very crunchy rather than like a chewy jerky. So so with that said, I'm sure you guys are dying to know how it tastes. I already know how it tastes, but let's just go ahead and grab a small piece from our bag here. So this is the peppered. This is from the first type of meat that we cut. I forgot exactly what it is now. When I go back and edit it, I'll remember. But basically, this is from the first tray that we did. First pieces we cut up. And that's good stuff. Oh, man, this is so good. I almost like it more with the lack of Worcestershire. Usually it's a little bit sweeter, but this time it turned out a little bit saltier, obviously because of all the extra soy sauce. That is actually really, really good stuff. But nothing compares to my baby. Oh, my beautiful jalapeno. This one is definitely my favorite, 100%. This thing turned out so amazing. It has just an incredible jalapeno flavor, and there's not much heat. Like, there's a little bit of heat there, but honestly, the flavor of the jalapeno is just phenomenal. It is by far the best flavor out of all of them. So what I'm going to do now is, now that they are all separated out, I'm going to go back and figure out exactly which cuts were what, and I'm going to bag them in Mylar. So I was going to record that as part of this video, but I feel like this video is already long enough. So basically all I'm going to do is just take a Mylar bag, drop some jerky in with a little oxygen absorber, and then seal it. And that's literally it. So you're not missing much. But hopefully you guys had fun with this video. Like I said, I sent out a tweet asking what you guys wanted to see, and this is the one that won. So I put that tweet out on my RGA Minecraft Twitter. So if you guys want to follow me there until I get the BroZone one going, eventually the BroZone will be able to have its own polls, but I also got to get a BroZone one going too. So I'll try to create something for that. But hopefully, again, you guys had fun. If you did, hit that like button, and I'll see you guys again next time. If you're new, subscribe, because we've got some cool stuff coming up. We got 4 different kinds of hard apple cider that we're going to be making in a future video. But until then, you've been watching the BroZone. Goodbye, everybody.